JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a series known for having one of the most insane power systems in all of anime. It's not very often that a series can have such a wide range of abilities while also allowing them to adhere to the same rules. From literally stopping time all the way to the ability to turn others into snails, it truly doesn't get wackier than this. But somehow Araki found a way to perfectly hold the balance between wacky and downright awesome. And that brings me to today, where I am going to tell you why JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is the king of power systems.
闇を欺いて切なを交わして刃すり抜け奴らの隙をつけ
Now, I know that JoJo's is known for the insane and unique stands, but before we get into that, I need to talk about the original power system, hamon. Now, I'm a fan of hamon, and a lot of other people are as well, and I was even pretty disappointed when it was fully written out of the show. A common misconception people have about this power is that it's very basic and boring, but I think people forget just how much potential hamon had. Hamon is the ability to control your breathing, creating ripples of energy identical to the sun's rays, and its purpose is to be an exact counter to the stone mask and vampires. Much like how a person's stand says a lot about them, hamon is the same way. It is extremely versatile, and practically its only limits are your imagination, which is why among all hamon users, few have any shared attacks. To me, a fight scene is at its best when it says a lot about a person. Actions speak louder than words, and oftentimes you can learn a lot about a character just by the way they act throughout any given fight, and later on in JoJo, you can learn more about a character through their stand ability than how they act. And hamon is similar. Instead of their ability being a stand, it's almost as if the hamon users are the stand themselves. If a stand is the physical manifestation of a human soul, then the techniques hamon breathers use would be their equivalent. The same way a very straightforward and serious character like Jotaro has a very simple and power-based stand, all of Jonathan's techniques are very straightforward, mostly amounting to a big punch in various different ways, even pioneering the punch barrages that become so prevalent later on. And although hamon in part 1 just amounted to a simple power-up, in part 2 it really began to shine. We see it infused more with objects like the scarf that Straizo uses in order to better conduct hamon, or the iconic clacker volley used by Joseph. Not to mention the wide variety of bubble attacks Caesar has at his disposal, which on a side note, when I was trying to find out how Caesar created his bubbles, it says that his gloves are loaded with a special soap-like substance, which means he's just constantly walking around with moist gloves. And especially in a part as weird as Battle Tendency, this freedom of expression is just perfect for all of the characters. It's important to remember that parts 1 and 2 ran from 1987 to 1989, and when you compare the creativity of hamon to some of the power systems of that time like Ki from Dragon Ball, it was already a step above the competition. Brandon Sanderson, the author of series like Mistborn and Oathbringer that are known for having some of the most creative powers in media, classifies power systems into two categories: hard magic and soft magic. Soft magic is when a power system has less rules and it can kind of do anything. Think of a show like Fairy Tail, where the magic seemingly has no limits and is constantly being used to bail people out of situations, and it plays into that mysticism of a fantasy world. Hard magic is a system that has a set of rules that are clearly stated, and instead of the powers being the answer to every problem, it's the way characters use said powers in order to get out of each situation. Instead of it magically fixing everything, it's more of a tool that on top of these characters' experience solves the problem. These types of power systems don't add new abilities, but add more creative uses of the already established abilities. The two best examples of this would be in things like Avatar: The Last Airbender and Full Metal Alchemist, where there are very clear rules to the abilities, and the fun comes from the creative ways that each character can use said abilities. Things like metal bending, which isn't actually a whole new style of bending, but just a creative use of the earth bending. Or like Roy Mustang's flame alchemy, where he has a transmutation circle carved into his hand rather than something like solo leveling, where he's just constantly gaining new abilities. I tend to enjoy hard magic systems more, and I would say that hamon falls into that category. Even if everybody uses it in a different way, they all adhere to the same set of hard rules. And although that worked very well for the first two parts, hamon pretty much served its purpose after the defeat of the vampires and the stone mask being destroyed. And I think for a series like Jojo that quite literally has the word bizarre in its name, a balance between the sheer bullshittery of a soft power system and the rules of a hard power system are perfect. Remember that whole spiel I just gave you, because I'm going to be referring to hard magic and soft magic a lot in this video, as well as adding on to it more. There are a lot of important things to think about when you create a power system, but at the end of the day, what matters most are two things: that the author understands the system and that the author is having fun with it, which is everything that stands are. Something that separates a long-running manga like One Piece and JoJo's with other series is that their mangaka have literally spent half of their life creating this one project, and in that, the passion really translates onto the reader. Each island in One Piece is like its own new anime, and Oda kind of just draws whatever he thinks would be fun. I mean, this man literally only sleeps for 3 hours a night and spends the rest of his life creating One Piece. So any fun Oda has in his life is through the characters in this story, and JoJo is the same way with stans. It's pretty well known that Araki is a big fan of music, and that from part 4 onward, all of the abilities are named after and are music-based. Because when you think about it, he spends most of his life drawing JoJo and listening to music, meaning that his fun comes from the insane abilities he can come up with. It's not like he just names an ability after a band or a song, but he actually puts a lot of thought into the way the abilities work. From something as simple as Aerosmith, which ends up just being a small plane, or what I think is the gold standard of stans, Crazy Diamond. Crazy Diamond has the ability to heal anything besides Josuke, which is a reference to the song Shine On You, Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd, which is a tribute to Syd Barrett, a member who was able to heal other people with his music, but never himself, and he eventually ended up leaving the music industry due to mental health issues. Small things like this just go to show how much thought Araki puts into each of the stans. Araki is also a big fan of fashion, and one of his biggest considerations while making JoJo is making things memorable through giving them a lot of style, and that same philosophy is shown in stan design, because just look at how cool these stans get. Stans like D4C, Purple Haze, Killer Queen, and Vitamin C, just to name a few, are all so insanely cool looking and memorable. The show is called JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and in part 2, Araki completely gave up on trying to make things make sense. In episode 1, Joseph spawns in a Tommy gun and lights up Straizo. He literally spawns in a plane, and he's constantly predicting what people are going to say, and it's all just stupid. And taking that same logic and applying it to the power system works so well in his favor. Because stans are so ridiculous as a concept, it never leaves you questioning the logic of how these powers exist in the same universe. An example being Aerosmith and Silver Chariot existing in the same part. Speaking of parts, JoJo's is an ever-evolving series, and it's almost better to look at each part as a completely different show rather than a continuation of the last series. And the reason I say this is because the rules of stans change in almost every single part. They are ever-evolving the exact same ways that JoJo's is, and due to the part system changing characters and time periods, it never feels too unrealistic that stans can go from being pretty simple in Stardust Crusaders apart from a few, to just absolutely reality-shattering in Stone Ocean. If you look at some of the most renowned power systems of all time, such as Nen from Hunter x Hunter, one of the most mystical things about it is that anybody can obtain the power, and even if stans aren't presented in this way, the further you get into the series, the more you realize there's more ways to get a stan than just being born with it. In Steel Ball Run, we were given a panel saying, and like the Ripple from Phantom Blood and the Steel Balls from Steel Ball Run, these abilities can be said to be a step towards achieving the ultimate goal of a stand, and Araki even talks about how while creating Joseph's stand, Hermit Purple, he tried to visualize the way that hamon would wrap around and encompass the user, which resulted in Hermit Purple. That, on top of the walleyes from part 8, the arrows from part 4 through 6, and being born with it, there's just a load of ways to get these insane abilities. So although some people are born special, for the most part, there is a chance that anybody can get a stand. Aside from stans just being fun, the way the powers are written is actually extremely unique, because stans fall into the category of a soft power system, where they can seemingly have any ability, but each individual stand is written like a hard power system, where they all have a very specific set of rules, and for the most part, they never gain new abilities or evolve unless it's an axe stand or if they're stabbed by the arrow. And I think the main draw to stands, as well as the main reason the stand of the week formula continues to work even now, is because no matter how weak or niche an ability, if used correctly, any stand can be extremely terrifying. Think of everybody's first introduction to a great power system, Pokemon. One of the most interesting things about Pokemon is that it's all about matchups and strategy. It's the reason reason there's entire YouTube channels based on doing niche Pokemon challenges. Because a Pokemon that is on paper weaker can be a much stronger opponent if the strategy they use is right. For example, a Charmeleon could beat a Venusaur regardless of power level due to the nature of fire versus grass. We see trainers do things like use their Pokemon to alter the battlefield in ways that give them a strategic advantage, and in general, that is what's so interesting about the fighting in this series. A lot of battle shonen fall into the problem of power creep. Take My Hero Academia, for example. The original draw to this series was very similar to Stands or Pokemon, where everybody loved the idea of taking bad quirks on paper and using them in a smart way, with characters like Shinso and Lemillion. But as the series goes on and the scale goes so high, they eventually have to start doing things like giving Deku new abilities or coming up with unrealistic ways other people's powers evolve. Or something like Dragon Ball, where regardless of your ability, if you have a smaller power number, you will lose. Like Guldo, who can literally stop time, which by the way is considered the strongest ability in all of Jojo. But he just ends up being a throwaway villain in the Ginyu Force due to having a smaller power level, and where these series fail for the most part is where Jojo shines above the rest. Apart from Stardust Crusaders, where it feels like it falls into the my stand punches harder therefore I win category, the most powerful opponents aren't strong because their ability is powerful, although there are some really good abilities, but instead they are strong due to the creative ways they use their stand, or the creative ways they can counter their opponents. A great example of this is when Josuke uses Crazy Diamond in order to fix glass and return it to its original state, which sends the shards of glass flying towards Kira. So although in terms of pure power, Killer Queen is unmatched, Josuke is still able to find ways to work around that. Another thing that makes abilities a lot more interesting is when they are strong in a very specific situation. An example of this being in Link Click, where Shang Xiaoshi is able to travel back in time through photos, which is not a power-based ability at all. But in episode 12, he sets up a room full of photos and continuously jumps into and out of the photos, effectively allowing him to teleport around his opponent to easily beat him. One of the stands that encapsulate this idea best would be Catch the Rainbow in Steel Ball Run. If you haven't read it, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything, but this stand is extremely situational. But when placed in that very specific situation, it becomes downright overpowered. When there is no rain, Blackmore is more or less just a normal human, but if natural rainfall occurs, he gains complete control over the rain in the area, being able to do things like stop all raindrops midair and make them solid enough for him to stand on, effectively allowing him to fly. He can transport his body parts between raindrops in the air, turn them into weapons, and he can even plug his own wounds. But the second it stops raining, he becomes human once again. When riding a soft power system, it's really easy to fall into the trap of using a Deus Ex Machina in order to solve all the issues. And although Jojo does have some moments that are kind of like that, I don't think they quite fall into the category of Deus Ex Machina. One of the most famous examples of this is Golden Experience Requiem, which a lot of people, including me, have said felt a little out of place. But upon looking into it, I think I know why. A Deus Ex Machina is when someone is given an unexpected power to save them from a hopeless situation. But in part 5, that's not what happens. From the time Diavolo is introduced, it's a well-known thing that whoever gets the arrow and stabs their stand with it will win. And although many of us expected the climax to be the fight between Giorno and Diavolo, in reality, the climax was actually the race for the arrow. So instead of Golden Experience Requiem being the solution to the problem, the actual solution was when they all cut their fingers in order to see if their blood was dripping, signifying that time was sped up. And it's the creative solutions to the seemingly impossible problems that make it realistic for certain characters to be beaten. And in general, stands are truly unique in every way. They say more about the characters than the characters' actions themselves. Golden Experience representing Giorno's appreciation for life and his goal to stop the mob from selling drugs, Moody Blues with the ability to rewind time, mirroring Abakio's regrets from his past, or even Crazy Diamond, which reflects the way that Josuke was able to heal Morio after the events with Kira. They fall into the category of a soft power system, but adhere to the rules of hard magic. They give the users the ability to think outside of the box, and instead of coming down to which character has a stronger punch, it feels like you could almost turn it into a mathematical equation where you can definitively tell which character would win. Is it the perfect power system? No, but it was never meant to be. JoJo's as a series has always been flawed, and what makes it so special is watching it evolve until it truly becomes something amazing, and the power system is the exact same way. But most of all, in a series that's main focus is on being bizarre, this power system is just a hell of a lot of fun, making it my favorite power system in all of media. Peace.